can't stay here. I don't know who to trust.
I'm here now.
Tell me what she needs, quickly.
Snow whirled like shards of glass against the frost-lined tower, lights flickering across the storm-struck skyline. In the blackout above Boston, a weary CEO heard a child's faint cry and found what the blizzard had once taken from him. The blizzard had turned Boston into a ghost city. Wind howled through empty streets, burying cars and streetlights in white. From his corner office on the 52nd floor of Frostline Technologies, Elias Mercer stood motionless, watching the storm erase the skyline he had once conquered. The emergency lights flickered, dim halos casting his reflection across the glass wall. His navy suit was immaculate, but his eyes, cold, sharp behind those high-end glasses, betrayed exhaustion that no success could fix. 5 years ago, another storm like this one had taken his 8-year-old son. Since then, Elias had built Frostline's empire on grief and logic, creating AI systems that could predict and prevent winter deaths. Yet tonight, the technology he'd invented was powerless to stop the city from freezing. He turned away from the window, loosening his tie. The building hummed beneath him, the sound of generators and servers running through the silence. Down below, maintenance crews worked through the night. One of them was Grace Holloway, a quiet woman who scrubbed marble floors to keep her sick son fed. Her badge didn't open upper floors, but tonight, due to the blackout, security was thin. On the ground level, her mop clacked against tile while shy. Oliver, her 7-year-old boy, dozed near a small heater. His cheeks were pale, lips tinged blue. Grace wrapped him tighter in her coat and whispered, "Just one more floor, sweetheart, then we'll rest." A low hum shook the walls. Lights blinked, then died. The sudden darkness swallowed the lobby whole. Elias looked up from his tablet as the entire tower fell silent. Every system went dark. His servers, the AI mainframe, everything. Then, through the mechanical groan of the emergency doors locking, he heard it, soft, distant, barely audible through the stairwell. "Mom, it's cold." It wasn't his son's voice, but it froze his heart all the same. He grabbed a flashlight from his desk drawer and moved toward the stairs. The air grew colder as he descended. His polished shoes echoed in the stairwell, flashlight beams slicing through dust and steel. The voice came again, weaker this time, from a few floors below. When he pushed open the door to the mezzanine, he saw her, a woman kneeling in the dark, arms around a small boy lying limp on the floor. "Help!" Grace's voice cracked, half fear, half prayer. He's not breathing." Elias didn't hesitate. He knelt, checking Oliver's pulse. Nothing. He removed his coat, laid it beneath the boy, and started chest compressions. Calm, steady, every count precise. "Come on, kid," he muttered. "Breathe." Grace's tears streaked through the dirt on her face. "Please, someone called 911, but the lines are down." Elias finished for her, not looking up. "Hold his head steady." The boy's chest rose once, then again. A faint gasp escaped his lips. Elias exhaled hard, relief breaking through his professional mask. He removed his own coat and wrapped it around the shivering child. "Keep him warm," he said. Grace blinked at him, recognizing the authority in his tone but not the man himself. "Who are you?" He stood, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Just someone who doesn't like losing people in storms." Before she could thank him, he turned and disappeared into the flickering corridor, his footsteps swallowed by the hum of the failing generators. Grace held her son close, the heavy coat smelling faintly of cedar and winter air. In the pocket, her fingers brushed something cold, a silver pen, engraved with words too faint to read in the dark. Outside, the storm screamed against the glass, but somewhere deep in the tower, a man who had sworn he'd never feel again stopped at the stairwell landing, gripping the rail until his knuckles turned white. He could still hear the boy's faint breath. and, for the first time in years, Elias Mercer felt the smallest spark of warmth in the cold. The storm raged like a living thing, clawing at the frost-lined tower as if trying to tear the glass from its frame. Inside, the air hung heavy with silence and cold. Grace sat on the lobby floor, her back against a marble column, cradling Oliver beneath the CEO's discarded coat. The fabric was too fine for her rough hands, lined with warmth that didn't belong in her world. She didn't know who that man was, the stranger who'd appeared from the shadows like a guardian in a power suit. But the memory of his voice lingered. Calm, low, certain. The kind of tone that made panic stand still. Outside, sirens howled in the distance, then faded beneath the roar of the wind. The emergency heater sputtered and went out. Grace's flashlight flickered, threatening to die too. She pressed her lips against her son's temple. "Just stay with me, Ollie. You're okay now. You're okay." Footsteps echoed again, measured, deliberate. The beam of another flashlight cut across the room. The same man stepped out of the shadows, his face pale under the blue emergency lights. He wasn't just anyone. Grace recognized him now. His photograph was in every hallway of the building, printed on Frostline's website, in every newsletter. Elias Mercer, the founder, the genius, the unreachable man in glass. She froze. "Mr. Mercer, sir, Save it," he said quietly. He crouched beside her again, his breath visible in the freezing air. "How's his pulse?" "Stronger, but he needs a hospital. I can't get a signal." "I know," Elias replied. "All networks are down. The storm fried half the grid." He reached for his phone anyway, tapping the screen with practiced control, even as static replaced every attempt at a call. His calmness wasn't rehearsed. It was armor. Grace could feel the weight behind it, something deep and fractured. "Do you have anywhere warm to take him?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice small. "We live in the South District. Power's out there too." He studied her a moment, then stood, pulling off his gloves. "Follow me." Grace blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. "Sir?" "There's a backup generator room on 17. It's insulated. You can wait out the worst of the storm there." She hesitated. "Sir, I can't—" "Argue?" His tone softened. "Don't. Carry him." Grace gathered Oliver into her arms, his head resting on her shoulder. Elias led the way up the emergency stairwell, his flashlight beam steady, even as wind rattled the glass around them. Each step creaked under the building's strain. When they reached the 17th floor, the door opened to a cavernous space filled with humming servers and faint red lights. Heat radiated from the machines. Elias motioned to a corner near the wall. "There, sit. He'll warm up faster." Grace lowered Oliver carefully, her knees aching from exhaustion. The hum of machinery was almost soothing, like a giant heartbeat echoing through the floor. She looked up. Elias was pacing slowly between server racks, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "You don't even know us." He paused. His gaze lingered on a blinking panel before he answered. "Because 5 years ago, someone needed help in a storm, and no one came." Grace's throat tightened. "Your son," she whispered. She remembered the story. Everyone in Boston did. The blizzard that had swallowed the Mercer boy on a frozen road. Elias's jaw flexed, but he didn't confirm it. "Get some rest," he said instead. "I'll keep the heat stable." She wanted to thank him, but the words caught behind her ribs. He moved like a man who didn't know what to do with gratitude. When she finally settled beside her sleeping child, she noticed the silver pen still in her hand, the one he'd left behind. Under the faint red light, she could read the inscription clearly now. "For those who freeze alone." She turned it over, her thumb tracing the etched letters. It wasn't just a company slogan. It was something personal, something born from loss. Hours later, as the wind howled against the tower, Grace drifted into a restless sleep beside her son. Across the room, Elias stood by the glass, watching the storm move like a ghost through the city he'd sworn to protect. When a flash of lightning illuminated his reflection, he barely recognized the man staring back. Somewhere deep in the tower's control system, the power grid flickered alive for just a moment, long enough to record a sound. A boy's faint whisper over the PA system. "They hurt my mom." Elias froze. Morning crept into Boston like a ghost. Dim, gray, and brittle. The storm hadn't stopped. It had only changed shape, turning snow into sheets of ice that coated every window of the Frostline Tower. From the outside, the skyscraper looked like it had been carved out of a glacier. Aside, the servers hummed weakly, struggling to stay alive on backup power. Elias Mercer hadn't gone home. He hadn't slept. The CEO of Frostline Technologies sat alone in the operations hub, coat draped over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. On his monitor glowed a small, blinking icon. Audio log detected. He clicked it. Through the static came a soft, trembling voice, a child's voice. "They hurt my mom." Elias's pulse quickened. The timestamp matched the night before, hours after he'd left Grace and her son in the generator room. The words echoed through the sterile control center, faint but unmistakable. He played it again. "They hurt my mom." He closed his eyes. It wasn't Oliver's tone that shook him. It was the resemblance to another voice, one burned into memory. His own son, Noah, on a long-ago phone call, whispering the same kind of fear before the line had gone dead in a storm just like this. The memory came uninvited. Snow, sirens, headlights fading. His wife's cry. The empty road. Elias's jaw tightened. He opened Frostline's security feeds and rewound the footage from the lower floors. There. Movement near the freight elevators. 2 maintenance men dragging equipment crates, their badges unregistered. He zoomed in, and his stomach turned. Not maintenance. Not employees. And Grace Halloway, was standing nearby, trying to push past them, one arm shielding her son. He hit the intercom. "Security! Respond to Level 3 freight zone now!" Silence. No response. The storm had jammed every external line. Elias slammed his hand on the desk, frustration slicing through his calm exterior. Then he noticed something else, a new entry in the system's log. File access request. Halloway, G. Timestamp 02:17 a.m. Someone had used her credentials to enter restricted data storage. That shouldn't have been possible. Grace didn't have clearance beyond janitorial access. Someone had given her authorization. Someone high up. Harper Kane. Elias leaned back, mind sharp despite the fatigue. Harper, his vice president, had been pushing for weeks to commercialize Frostline's core AI system, FrostLink, for private defense contracts. Elias had refused, citing ethics and public safety. The board had backed him, but Harper didn't take rejection well, and now, with the storm masking everything, it was the perfect night to steal it. He tapped a button, calling up Harper's keycard logs. No entry since midnight. No exit either. He was still in the building. Elias stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. The floor lights flickered as the emergency generator dipped again. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost in motion, eyes ringed with fatigue, face harder than he remembered. Downstairs, in the staff lounge, Grace sat with Oliver, trying to coax him to eat from a vending machine sandwich. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. She hadn't slept. Every creak in the walls made her tense. When the elevator doors opened, she flinched, until she saw Elias. "Mr. Mercer." She stood too quickly, nearly spilling the coffee she'd managed to scavenge. About last night. Thank you. For everything. I'll clean up and get out of your way." He studied her for a long beat, then said quietly, "Someone used your access card last night." Her breath caught. "What? That's impossible. I had it with me." He stepped closer. "You're sure?" Grace reached into her pocket, pulling out her key card. Her hands trembled. "I swear, I didn't—" "I know. Elias's tone softened. But someone wants it to look like you did. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Mr. Kane, she whispered. He told me to sign something yesterday. Said it was just paperwork for payroll. But when I looked closer, it was data transfer authorization. Elias finished grimly. Her eyes filled with fear. He said he'd help cover my son's medical bills if I signed. Elias exhaled slowly, anger burning beneath the calm. Grace, listen to me. Harper doesn't help people. He buys silence. If he thinks you know too much, you and your son aren't safe. She shook her head. I didn't sign. I told him no. Then he'll find another way. Before she could respond, a sharp metallic clang echoed through the hallway. Oliver gasped, clutching his mother's sleeve. Elias turned toward the sound, toward the freight elevators. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. For a moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the glass and the hum of the servers dying one by one. In the darkness, Elias's voice came low, steady, almost protective. Stay close to me. Grace took Oliver's hand and nodded, fear rising like frost in her veins. Somewhere deep within Frostline Tower, the storm outside wasn't the only one about to break. The stairwell lights buzzed, then sputtered out completely, plunging the Frostline Tower into a deeper dark. The blizzard outside shrieked through every crack in the glass. Inside, the silence that followed was worse. It felt alive. Elias's flashlight flicked on, slicing through dust and steam. He motioned for Grace to stay behind him. Oliver clung to her side, eyes wide, the CEO's oversized coat swallowing his small frame. They crept along the narrow corridor toward the server wing. Somewhere below, metal clanged again, measured, deliberate. Not wind. Footsteps. Grace's whisper trembled. Why would they still be here? The police. Can't reach us in this storm, Elias said quietly. They're counting on that. He led them into the operations room. The emergency lights cast a dull crimson glow across the rows of servers, painting Elias's face in sharp edges. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar now, his tie loosened, hair damp with condensation. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man holding the line against something much larger than himself. Grace placed Oliver on a padded bench near the wall. I can't believe this is happening, she murmured. Elias's voice was steady but low. I can. He moved toward a control panel, checking power readings. People do desperate things when they can't feel the cold anymore, inside or out. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but there was pain buried in those words, something older than this night. A few minutes later, a flicker of blue light blinked across the server racks. Elias frowned, tracing the signal. They're in the network, he muttered. Someone's trying to override Frostline's mainframe from a remote terminal. If they succeed, the entire city grid goes dark. Grace stepped forward. Can I help? He looked at her. Really looked this time. Her hair was damp, strands sticking to her cheek. Her hands were raw from work, but her gaze was steady. You know your way around wiring? She nodded. MIT Mechanical Engineering. I never finished my degree. Elias arched an eyebrow. Then you're about to finish a crash course. He knelt beside the generator relay. See that cable junction? Grace crouched next to him, following his gestures. The air smelled of ozone and metal. Together they stripped and rewired a frayed cable, their hands brushing briefly. For a moment, something passed between them, unspoken understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. The generator hummed back to life, filling the space with warmth. Elias looked up. Good work. Grace almost smiled. You too, boss. He hesitated, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that almost resembled a smile. I suppose that's accurate. But before either could say more, a burst of static crackled through the intercom. A voice, male, confident, cold, cut through the noise. Mercer, I hear you found new company. Elias stiffened. Harper. Grace's blood ran cold. You really shouldn't have meddled. Harper's voice continued. "We could have avoided all this. The data transfer's done. But since you're still here, I'll take the rest of the system, one way or another." Elias's hand clenched into a fist. "You don't know what you're doing. Frostline's core isn't built for your kind of deal-making. It's predictive rescue AI. It learns from human crisis response. You'll turn it into a weapon. Then it'll finally make money," Harper replied dryly. "You're welcome to watch me collect." The line cut off with a hiss. Grace looked to Elias, fear creeping in. "What does he mean?" Elias moved fast, scanning the servers. "He's rerouting control to the central tower. If he gets the core, he can shut down power to the hospitals, the shelters. Every heat grid, Frostline manages. He's trying to prove I can't control my own company." "Then we stop him," Grace said. He met her eyes, surprised not by her courage but by her certainty. "You don't even know what that means." "I know what it's like to have someone hold your survival over you," she said softly. "And I'm not letting him take what you built." The conviction in her voice hit him harder than the cold. He exhaled, nodding once. "Then we move now. Generator hall's 3 floors down. We can reroute from there." As they stepped into the stairwell, Grace stumbled. Elias caught her before she fell, his hand steady on her arm. For the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes. Humanity, not just control. "Careful," he murmured. "You don't have to help us," she said quietly. "You could leave. You're the CEO. You could wait this out." He held her gaze. "And if I did, what would I be worth?" They reached the next landing. Elias pushed open the heavy door. Warm air rushed through, a mechanical bay humming faintly under flickering lights. Grace swayed, dizzy from exhaustion. Elias caught her again, easing her onto a low bench. "You need rest," he said firmly. "You've done enough." She blinked up at him, dazed. "And what about you?" "I don't sleep much." His tone softened. "Haven't in years." Her eyes searched his face. "Because of your son." He didn't answer, but his silence said everything. Grace's head lolled, exhaustion overtaking fear. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Elias sitting beside the server console, gaze distant, framed by the flickering red lights like a man standing guard between worlds, one filled with loss, the other with fragile hope. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. Inside, the storm found its match in a man who refused to freeze again. The storm had swallowed the city whole. From the 17th floor of Frostline Tower, Boston looked like a white void. No lights, no streets, no shape. Just endless cold pressing against the glass. Grace woke to the hum of machinery and the faint warmth of the generator. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then, her son stirred beside her, his breath visible in the air. "Mom?" Oliver whispered. "I'm here," she said softly, pulling him close. Her fingers brushed the heavy coat draped over them, Elias Mercer's coat. The fine wool carried his faint cologne, something clean and sharp that somehow made her feel safer. But the safety didn't last. Voices echoed faintly through the corridor. She turned toward the sound just as the steel door slid open. 2 men in dark jackets stepped inside. They weren't Frostline employees. Their eyes gave that away. Cold, predatory, scanning like wolves. One smirked. "You Grace Holloway?" Her stomach dropped. Before she could answer, a hand slammed the wall beside her head. "Boss says you've been asking questions. That's a problem." Oliver whimpered, clutching his bear tighter. Grace's heart raced, but she stood between them, chin high. "You don't belong here. Security's on its way." The first man laughed. "Security's stuck in traffic, sweetheart. Blizzard's got the whole city on ice." The second man reached for her arm. "You're coming with us. Mr. Kane wants a word." Grace shoved him back, pure adrenaline propelling her. "You'll have to drag me." He raised a fist. Then, sudden silence. The overhead lights flickered and a voice cut through the stillness, calm and controlled. "Step away from her." Elias stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, shirt open at the collar, a faint streak of grease across his wrist from the generators. But the air around him changed instantly. The authority in his stance, the razor focus in his blue eyes. The intruders faltered. One tried to recover. "This doesn't concern you, Mercer." Kane said. "I don't care what Kane said." Elias's voice lowered. Dangerous. "This is my building. My people." The man smirked. "You're not the only one signing checks anymore." "Maybe not," Elias said, "but I'm the only one still breathing if you touch her." He didn't raise his voice, but the conviction in it made both men hesitate. Elias stepped closer, calm as a blade sliding from its sheath. "Walk out of here, now, before the city thaws and someone finds what's left of you under the snow." The silence stretched. Then the first man scoffed and backed toward the door. "This isn't over." "It is," Elias said flatly, "if you want to live." When they were gone, Grace slumped against the wall, shaking. You could have been killed." He glanced at her, the faintest flicker of warmth in his eyes. "So could you, but you didn't run." "I couldn't," she whispered, looking down at Oliver. "He's all I have." Elias's gaze softened. "And he's lucky to have you." She smiled weakly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think luck's the only thing keeping us alive." He didn't answer, but something flickered in his expression. Recognition. He'd once said the same thing about his own son, long ago. As Grace steadied herself, her hand brushed something in her pocket. The silver pen. She turned it over in her palm, thumb tracing the engraved words, "For those who freeze alone." "I never thanked you for this," she said softly. "For last night. For him." Elias's gaze lingered on the pen, then back to her. "It's more than it looks." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "It's a locator, an emergency beacon tied to Frostline's internal network. If anything happens, press the clip." Grace frowned. "Then why give it to me?" "Because," he said quietly, "I don't want to lose another child in a storm." Her breath caught. The pain behind his calm was no longer hidden. It was raw, visible. Before she could speak, a voice boomed through the intercom. "Harper." "Elias," it drawled, dripping with arrogance. "You can't hide her forever. The board will believe what I show them. She stole from us. You covered it up. When the grid fails, they'll blame you." Elias's jaw tightened. "He's trying to force me out," he murmured. "A hostile removal." "Can he do that?" Grace asked. "If he controls the data, yes, and he's already halfway there." He straightened, focus returning. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. If you hear anything strange, press that pen." Grace's voice trembled. "What about you?" He paused in the doorway, the storm's glow outlining him like a shadow carved from ice. "I built this company to save lives," he said. "If I can't save one tonight, none of it means anything." Then he was gone, into the blizzard roaring through the upper floors, leaving her with only the hum of servers and the soft pulse of the silver pen in her hand. Oliver stirred in his sleep. Grace tucked him in tighter, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure she believed anymore. Outside, somewhere in the storm, Elias Mercer walked alone toward the core of his empire, ready to fight for two lives the world had already decided were expendable. The wind screamed across the upper floors like a living creature. Frostline Tower groaned under the pressure, its glass panels flexing against the storm. Elias Mercer climbed the final flight of stairs to the executive level, the beam of his flashlight trembling faintly against the walls. He could feel his own pulse hammering through his shoulder where the graze from earlier had begun to ache. The door to the data core stood ahead, its security light blinking red, locked from the inside. Harper was there. Elias knew it. He wiped blood from his cuff, straightened his tie, and keyed in the override code. The panel rejected it with a metallic buzz. Harper had changed the access. He exhaled sharply, and leaned against the railing, staring down at the empty lobby far below. His reflection rippled across the window, a man framed by snow, haunted by 1,000 ghosts. 5 years ago, he had stood on another glass balcony, staring into another storm, waiting for searchlights that never came. A snow rescue AI had been just a dream back then, one he'd built too late to save his own son. Now that dream was being stolen. "Mr. Mercer!" A voice called from behind. He turned. Grace stood in the doorway, her coat buttoned, her face pale but determined. "I told you to stay with your son," he said sharply. "He's safe," she replied, stepping forward. "But I'm not letting you face this alone. You'll need help with the access grid." He almost argued, but then he saw the defiance in her eyes, that quiet, steady strength he'd seen only in people who'd lost everything and kept moving anyway. He nodded once. "Then stay close." Together they approached the main console. Elias knelt beside the access panel, prying it open with a screwdriver. "Harper changed the root encryption, but if I can bypass it manually." Grace crouched beside him, studying the exposed wires. "You need to isolate the power feed first." He looked at her surprised. "You really did study engineering." "Almost finished a degree," she said. "Then Oliver was born. His heart condition came first." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not bitter. It struck Elias in a way he didn't expect. "You gave up a future for him." "I didn't give it up," she said quietly. "He is my future." Before he could answer, the console sparked violently. Grace flinched. Elias caught her hand, steadying her wrist before she touched a live wire. Their eyes met. The moment held. Raw, human, fragile. Then a slow clap echoed across the floor. Harper Kane emerged from the shadows, his immaculate suit marred only by the faint sheen of sweat. "Touching," he drawled. "Tragic backstories, working-class nobility, and the great Elias Mercer trying to save a janitor's child. You always had a flair for drama." Elias stood, his voice measured. "It's over, Harper. Walk away now and I'll keep the board from pressing charges." Harper smirked. "Charges? Elias, they'll thank me. While you were down here playing hero, I secured Frostline's patents. The military contract's mine now. By morning, you'll be out, and I'll be sitting in that chair you've guarded like a shrine." Grace took a step forward. "You used my badge to steal his data. You tried to frame me." Harper's smile widened. "You signed the wrong paper, sweetheart. The logs show your ID on the access files. All I have to do is hand them to the board. Single mother, desperate, easily manipulated. They'll eat it up." Elias's hands curled into fists. "You don't know what you're stealing. That system you're after, it's tied into the city's power grid. You destabilize it, and hospitals will lose heat by dawn." Harper shrugged. "Collateral. People die every winter. Might as well make a profit from it." Something in Elias snapped. "You disgust me." Harper's smirk faltered. "You always thought you were above the rest of us, pretending Frostline was charity, not business. But underneath it all, you're the same, a man who builds on tragedy. The only difference is, I'm honest about it." Elias took a step forward. "And I'm not done correcting mine." Before Harper could react, Elias lunged, slamming him against the console. The two men crashed into the glass, their reflections splintering with every blow. Grace cried out, rushing forward, but a gunshot froze her in place. Harper stumbled back, clutching a pistol. His hand trembled, eyes wild. "Stay back," he shouted. "One move and I'll—" A voice interrupted him, small but clear. "Mom?" Grace turned. Oliver stood in the doorway, barefoot, clutching his stuffed bear. He'd followed the sound of shouting. "No!" she gasped. "Oliver, go!" But Harper's aim had already shifted. Elias moved faster than thought. He shoved Grace aside and stepped directly into the line of fire. The gun went off. The echo tore through the chamber, louder than the storm outside. Elias staggered back, hand pressed to his shoulder. Blood seeped through his white shirt, staining it deep red. Harper froze, shocked by what he'd done. Elias's voice came low, deliberate. "You'll never own Frostline." Before Harper could fire again, Elias lunged forward, wrenching the gun away and slamming it onto the floor. The weapon skittered under a console. Grace rushed to Elias's side, pressing her hand against the wound. "You're bleeding." He grimaced, but didn't move away. "Keep pressure on it." Oliver stared, eyes wide, whispering, "Mom." "He saved us." Elias looked at him, really looked, and something broke open inside him, something long frozen. He reached for Grace's trembling hand, his voice barely audible over the sirens starting to wail in the distance. "Don't. Let him take the pen." Grace blinked. "What?" "The pen," Elias gasped. "Press it." She did, and instantly a pulse of blue light burst from the tiny device, racing across the Frostline network like lightning through veins of glass. Somewhere far below, in the tower's core, alarms erupted. The building came alive. Elias's lips curved in a faint, pained smile. Now they'll come. The building shook with the sound of sirens. Blue emergency lights spun across the glass walls, bathing everything in a cold, flickering haze. Snow battered the tower as if trying to swallow it whole. Grace knelt beside Elias, her hands trembling as she pressed against his shoulder. Blood seeped through her fingers, hot against the chill air. He was breathing fast, too fast, but his voice remained steady. "Keep him away from the console," he said, eyes flicking toward Harper, who had stumbled back, stunned by the sudden alarms. Harper's shock morphed into fury. "You think this saves you?" he snarled. "You've just triggered a citywide lockdown. No one's getting in or out." Grace looked at him, chest heaving. "Then you're trapped with us." Elias coughed, smearing blood across his hand as he pushed himself upright. "Grace, get Oliver out of here." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "Grace," he said, his voice low but commanding. "He's armed, and I can't hold him off twice. Take the elevator shaft, north side. It'll lead you to the maintenance wing. From there, find the stairwell and get to the lobby. Go." Before she could answer, Harper lunged, swinging a heavy wrench from the tool rack. Elias dodged, barely missing the blow, then slammed his fist into Harper's ribs. The man staggered back, gasping, then rammed Elias into the server bank. Sparks erupted, and for a heartbeat the entire room flashed white. Oliver cried out, covering his ears. Grace grabbed him, pulling him behind a row of consoles. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She could hear the men fighting. The dull thuds, the crash of metal, the sound of shattering glass. Then a voice cut through the chaos, low and fierce. Elias. "Grace! Now!" Grace grabbed Oliver and sprinted toward the emergency door, but Harper's hand caught her wrist. His breath was ragged, eyes feverish with desperation. "You think he's a hero? He's no better than me," Harper hissed. "He built this empire on loss, his son, his guilt. I just learned how to use it." She wrenched free, shoving him backward with all her strength. "You'll never understand what real loss feels like." Elias's voice roared across the room. "Grace, go!" She ran, clutching Oliver tight. Behind her, she heard the crash of bodies and the sound of glass splintering again. She didn't look back. The maintenance stairwell was pitch dark, the emergency bulbs flickering. Each step echoed like gunfire. Oliver clung to her neck, whispering, "Mom, is he gonna die?" "Not if we can help him," she said, her voice shaking. On the floor above, Elias staggered against the console, his vision blurring. Harper was gone, vanished through one of the service corridors. The power alarms screamed in his ears, warning of an overload. He pressed his hand to the wound, swaying slightly. The silver pen had done its job. The distress signal was broadcasting to every Frostline terminal in the city, but now the backup generators were overloading under the pressure. The servers sparked again, the smell of ozone thick in the air. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it. A soft voice through the speaker system, trembling but clear. "Mr. Mercer?" Grace's voice. He turned toward the intercom, his hand leaving a bloody smear across the glass. "I'm here. We're in the maintenance shaft, but it's flooding with smoke. The fire alarms. Something's burning." "Stay low," he said, forcing the words out evenly. "I'll reroute the exhaust system manually. Just keep moving toward the lobby." He gritted his teeth and limped toward the secondary panel. Pain shot through his arm with every step. The blizzard outside had turned the windows to white mirrors, his reflection ghostly and fractured. When he reached the console, his fingers slipped over the keys. Sparks flared again. Then the panel finally responded. The ventilation system whirred to life, pulling smoke from the lower floors. Grace's voice came back, soft and urgent. "We can breathe again. Elias. Thank you." For a moment, the chaos faded. The sound of her voice steadied him more than any medicine could. Then, faintly through the static, came another voice, smaller, higher. "Oliver. Mr. Mercer, I still have your pen. It's glowing blue." Elias's heart stopped. "Oliver, listen to me. Don't press it again. Do you understand? It's already done its job." "But it's beeping," the boy whispered, "like it's scared." Elias swallowed hard. "That means it's working. It's calling for help. Just hold on to it, kid. You're braver than most men I know." He heard Oliver's soft reply. "My dad used to say that." Elias's hand trembled against the console. "He sounds like a good man." "He died before I was born," the boy said quietly. "Mom says I got his eyes." Something broke inside Elias then. Something deep and buried. "I bet he'd be proud of you," he said softly. "I know I am." Then a gunshot echoed from the corridor. Elias flinched, instinctively turning toward the sound. Harper was back. Grace screamed through the intercom. "Elias!" He moved fast, dragging a heavy server rack in front of the control room door. "Keep moving, Grace! Don't stop!" Her voice came faint and broken. "You'll die if you stay there." "Better me than him," he said. "Go!" The intercom crackled, but she didn't respond. He knew she wouldn't leave easily. She was too much like him. Stubborn, loyal, unyielding when it mattered most. Elias braced himself against the console, blood still seeping through his sleeve. The alarms pulsed louder, red lights flashing across his face. Somewhere far below, Grace and Oliver ran through the smoke-filled corridors toward the frozen lobby. And somewhere above them, the man who had lost one child fought to save another. Outside, the storm howled harder, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The frost-lined tower groaned under the weight of the storm. Windows rattled. Steel beams moaned like wails beneath the crush of wind. Inside the executive wing, the power had begun to flicker again, plunging whole sections into red emergency glow. Elias Mercer stood alone in that light, pale against the darkened glass. His breath came ragged, the wound in his shoulder soaking his shirt. He'd blocked the control room door with a toppled console, but it wouldn't hold for long. Harper Kane was still out there, and worse, Elias could hear him moving. The sound came first as a scrape of metal, then as slow, deliberate footsteps. "You always thought you could save everyone," Harper's voice called from the shadows. "But here's the truth, Elias. Some people don't want to be saved. Some of us just want to win." Elias steadied himself against the desk, eyes narrowing. "You call this winning? Destroying everything we built?" "You built it," Harper replied, stepping into the light, gun in hand. "I'm just cashing it in, and now that the system's locked under your failsafe, I need you to unlock it." Elias didn't move. "And if I don't?" Harper smiled. "Then the whole city freezes by dawn. Your choice." The words landed like ice. Elias's mind raced through the code structure. If Harper corrupted Frostline's main grid, it wouldn't just shut down Boston's heating network. It could trigger cascading blackouts across New England. Hospitals, shelters, homes, all dark. "You'll kill thousands," Elias said. Harper shrugged. "Collateral damage. Investors will rebuild. Maybe even put your name on a memorial." That was when Elias realized Harper didn't understand Frostline's AI at all. The system wasn't just code, it was conscious learning, a predictive network that adjusted to human need. It was built to save. He'd written it after Noah's death, designing every algorithm to mimic one instinct, the instinct of a father who refuses to give up, and now it was up to him to prove it worked. Elias straightened slowly, his hand slipping toward the secondary control port. "You want the key?" he said quietly. "Come get it." Harper aimed the gun square at his chest. "Don't test me." Elias's voice was calm, measured. "I already am." At that exact moment, 3 floors below, Grace and Oliver stumbled into the frozen lobby. The windows had frosted over entirely, the air so cold their breaths came in clouds. The faint hum of the generator was the only sound. Grace pressed the elevator call button, but nothing responded. The system was dead. She turned to Oliver, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Remember what Mr. Mercer said? The pen can call for help." Oliver nodded, pulling it from his pocket. The little silver pen still glowed blue, its light pulsing steadily. "Press it," she whispered. He did. Upstairs, Harper flinched as the lights above them flickered, then turned pure white. The Frostline AI had awakened. The air filled with a low hum, like 1,000 circuits breathing at once. "What did you do?" Harper shouted. Elias's voice was quiet, steady, almost reverent. "I didn't do anything. The system did." A new tone echoed through the tower, like a chime cutting through static. Then came a voice, not human, but soft and clear, projected through every speaker. "Emergency signal detected. Initiating life preservation protocol." Harper's face twisted. "You're bluffing." Elias shook his head. "You think I built Frostline to obey me? I built it to replace me." Alarms flared across every floor. Doors sealed, vents opened, heat flooded through the core. A network map appeared on the nearest display, dozens of nodes lighting up in sequence, transmitting distress data to every city department. The system was calling for help. Harper screamed in rage and lunged forward. Elias ducked just as the gun fired. The bullet tore through the console, sparks exploding like fireworks. Harper's next shot went wide, glass shattering behind Elias, cold wind howling through the breach. Elias tackled him, the gun skidding across the floor. The 2 men struggled near the edge of the broken window, snow whipping through the air. Harper swung wildly, but Elias caught his wrist and twisted hard. The weapon clattered to the floor below. "You always had the advantage," Harper gasped. "The money, the name, the sympathy. But me? I earned this." Elias pinned him against the wall. "You earned nothing but your own ruin." He looked at the shattered glass and the swirling snow beyond it, then at Harper, whose fury had curdled into fear. "Don't do this," Harper stammered. Elias's grip loosened just slightly. "I'm not the one who decides anymore." Before Harper could reply, a sudden blast of pressure came from the ventilation shaft. The system had engaged an automated containment protocol, locking down every unsecured section of the tower. The floor beneath Harper's feet vibrated, then gave way. He fell backward, crashing through the broken glass into the storm below. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Elias staggered to the console, clutching his wounded shoulder, eyes blurring from pain and snow. The AI's voice echoed softly through the static. "Rescue units dispatched. ETA. 6 minutes." He sank to his knees, breath shaking. 6 minutes, he whispered. "That's enough." Down in the lobby, Grace heard the tower-wide alert. She wrapped her arms around Oliver, tears freezing on her cheeks. "He did it," she murmured. "He really did it." Oliver smiled faintly, eyes bright with relief. "I knew he would." Outside, emergency sirens grew louder through the storm, but in the shattered control room, Elias Mercer slumped against the glass, blood streaking his white shirt. Snow swirled around him like ghosts. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, its cracked screen glowing with one photo, the last image of his son, smiling in the snow 5 years ago. "I kept my promise," he whispered. Then the world tilted and darkness closed in. The world returned to him in fragments: sirens, the crackle of radios, the sharp scent of smoke and frost. Elias Mercer opened his eyes to a ceiling flickering with red and white light. The storm still howled outside the tower, but its voice had softened, like a beast retreating. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his shoulder, forcing him to gasp. Blood had dried across his sleeve. His vision cleared slowly. Paramedics in heavy winter gear, firefighters breaking through the shattered glass wall, snow blowing into the room in swirling white bursts. A medic crouched beside him. "You're lucky," she said. "The bullet missed the artery by an inch. Stay still." "Grace," he rasped. "And the boy." The medic glanced toward the radio. "They're alive. We found them in the lobby. Your emergency beacon led us right to them." Relief surged through him like warmth. He exhaled, chest trembling. "Good," he murmured. "Then the system worked." Downstairs, amid the chaos of flashing lights and emergency responders, Grace sat wrapped in a thermal blanket. Oliver lay against her, drowsy but safe. She kept glancing toward the elevator, eyes filled with worry. When she saw 2 paramedics emerge from the stairwell with Elias on a stretcher, she stood so fast the blanket fell away. "Mr. Mercer!" she cried. He looked at her, eyes half-lidded but alert. "You're safe," he managed. She stepped closer, tears glinting in her lashes. "Because of you. You nearly died." He gave a faint smile. "Seems to be a pattern." The paramedics loaded him onto a transport gurney, but Elias raised a hand weakly. "Wait." He turned his gaze toward Oliver. "Hey, kid." Oliver blinked, then walked forward hesitantly, still clutching the silver pen. "You kept it safe," Elias said softly. "That's what heroes do." Oliver's small hand tightened around it. It glowed blue the whole time. "I think it was trying to find you." Elias smiled faintly. "It did." The paramedics moved to lift him again, but Grace stepped closer. "Elias, thank you. For saving him. For saving both of us." He met her eyes. "You saved me too, Grace." His voice cracked slightly. "You reminded me what Frostline was supposed to be." The words hung there, fragile and real. Then the medics eased him onto the stretcher and carried him toward the waiting ambulance outside. Grace followed to the doorway. Snow blew in through the shattered lobby windows, coating the marble in thin white dust. She looked down at the silver pen still glowing in Oliver's hand and whispered, "He said it would protect us." Oliver pressed the pen into her palm. "It still can, Mom." She held it tight, watching the ambulance disappear into the swirling snow. Hours later, the storm finally broke. Boston woke to a city blanketed in white and humming with power again. Frostline's AI had rerouted energy to hospitals and shelters throughout the night, preventing what could have been a catastrophe. News drones circled the skyline, capturing the story that was already spreading. CEO risks life to stop cyber attack during blizzard. But for Grace, none of that mattered. She sat by Oliver's hospital bed, watching his small chest rise and fall beneath the blankets. His cheeks were pink again, his pulse strong. When the door opened behind her, she turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, Elias stood there, pale but upright, one arm bandaged and his coat draped over his shoulders. He looked exhausted, older somehow, but alive. Grace stood immediately. "You shouldn't be walking." He smiled faintly. "Doctors disagree. I signed myself out." "You what?" "I built Frostline to keep people alive," he said. "Seems wrong to miss its success story." Grace shook her head, half exasperated, half moved. "You're impossible." "Stubborn," he corrected softly. "It's different." He stepped closer to Oliver's bed, gaze softening as he watched the boy sleep. "He's strong." He gets that from his mom. Their eyes met, and for a moment the sterile hospital room felt warm. Elias reached into his pocket and withdrew a small metallic chip. "This belongs to you." Grace frowned. "What is it?" "The access log from last night. Proof that Harper used your credentials." He placed it in her hand. "You'll need it when the police question you." She stared at it, overwhelmed. "Why would you give this to me? You could use it yourself." "I don't need to," he said. "The truth will surface. It always does." Grace's throat tightened. "They'll still try to blame you. The board, the investors." He smiled faintly. "Let them. I've been fighting ghosts long enough. Maybe it's time to build something that actually matters." A pause settled between them, quiet but full. Snow drifted past the window, soft and slow now, no longer furious. Elias looked out at it and murmured, "My son loved the snow. Said it made the world clean again." Grace's voice softened. "He'd be proud of you. You saved so many tonight." Elias turned back to her. "You saved me first." Before she could reply, Oliver stirred, blinking awake. "Mr. Mercer?" he said sleepily. Elias smiled. "Hey, partner. You did good out there." Oliver grinned faintly. "Mom says you're a hero." Elias's smile deepened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, kid. Heroes are the ones who keep going even when nobody's watching." Grace looked at him, something unspoken passing between them, a quiet understanding born not of gratitude but of shared survival. Outside, the morning light grew stronger, reflecting off the snow-covered city. Frostline's systems hummed steadily again, its AI gently pinging messages across the network. All safe zones stabilized. The crisis was over, but something new had begun. The storm had passed, but the world it left behind was forever changed. Boston gleamed under a brittle winter sun, snow piled high on the sidewalks, the air sharp and clear. From the rooftop of St. Mary's Hospital, the city looked peaceful. Too peaceful, Elias thought, for everything it had survived the night before. He stood near the railing, his left arm in a sling, a wool coat draped over his shoulders. Below him, the city pulsed back to life, emergency crews clearing roads, power grids humming back online. Frostline's name flashed across every news ticker. AI firm prevents catastrophic blackout. But Elias didn't care about headlines. He was thinking about Grace and Oliver. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him, soft and hesitant. "You shouldn't be up here," Grace said gently. She wore a thick gray sweater beneath her parka, hair tucked behind her ears. "Doctors said you need rest." "I've had 5 years of rest," he murmured, eyes still on the skyline. "It's time I started living again." She moved to stand beside him, watching the sunlight catch on the ice-clad buildings. "They said the board wants a statement." "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm not giving them one. Not until I've decided what Frostline becomes next." Grace tilted her head. "After everything last night, you're still thinking about work?" "It's not work," he said. "It's a promise." She frowned slightly. "To your son?" Elias nodded once. "Noah deserved a world that could protect people from storms like that. I failed him once. I won't again." Grace folded her arms against the cold. "Then keep building. But maybe remember, you can't save the whole world alone." He turned toward her, studying her face. "You really think I can't?" She smiled faintly. "I think even geniuses need help sometimes." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Below, the hospital courtyard buzzed with reporters. Cameras glinted, microphones pointed skyward. But Elias ignored them. He pulled something from his pocket, the silver pen, now faintly scratched and burned from the night's chaos. He held it out to her. "You should have this." Grace shook her head. "It saved all of us. It's yours." Elias's expression softened. "No. You kept it when it mattered. You believed it could help. That faith saved lives." She hesitated, then took it. The engraved words caught the sunlight. "For those who freeze alone." Her fingers brushed his as she accepted it. "What does that mean to you?" He looked away, toward the city below. It used to mean guilt, a reminder that I couldn't save everyone. Now, he paused, his voice lowering. Now it means no one should ever have to face the cold alone, literal or otherwise. Grace's throat tightened. She looked down at the pen, then back at him. You really believe that? I have to, he said. Otherwise, all of this, every line of code, every sleepless night means nothing. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging at their coats. Somewhere below, Oliver's laughter floated faintly through the open window, soft, full of life. Elias closed his eyes briefly. That sound, simple and pure, reached deeper than any applause ever could. When he opened them again, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The Frostline Board's emergency meeting was already in session, demanding his presence. Grace caught his look. You're going to face them, aren't you? He nodded. Someone has to make them see Frostline isn't about profit, it's about people. And if they don't listen, he smiled faintly, then I'll rebuild it myself. She didn't doubt him. There was steel in his quiet conviction, an echo of the man who'd stepped into a storm to save her son. He turned to leave, but she stopped him with a hand on his good arm. Elias. He looked back. Don't carry it alone anymore, she said softly. The guilt, the responsibility. Let others in. You did it once. You can do it again. Her words lingered long after she left the rooftop. Later that afternoon, the Frostline boardroom was filled with nervous chatter. Executives in dark suits stood before massive digital screens showing real-time news coverage. The company's stock had surged overnight. Investors called it a miracle. When Elias entered, the room fell silent. He was pale but steady, his movements slow, deliberate. Mr. Mercer, one board member began, we were just discussing public relations. The incident has been reinterpreted favorably. We can use this narrative to secure new contracts. Elias set his coat on the table. You mean Harper's sabotage? Awkward silence. Another executive cleared his throat. Tragic, of course, but from a market standpoint, the publicity is extraordinary. If we align Frostline with defense applications— No, Elias said, cutting him off. His tone was quiet but final. That's over. The board shifted uneasily. Excuse me? Elias stepped closer to the table. Frostline was built to protect life, not end it. We're refocusing every resource toward humanitarian infrastructure, disaster relief, medical AI, environmental resilience. One man scoffed. That's not profitable. Elias's eyes hardened. Neither is losing your humanity. He pressed a button on the console. A projection filled the room. Emergency response data from the storm. Hundreds of saved coordinates highlighted in blue. This is what Frostline can do when it serves people instead of shareholders. No one spoke. The hum of the servers filled the silence. Elias turned toward the glass wall, the winter sun reflecting across his glasses. We have a second chance, he said softly. Let's not waste it. When he left the room, the executives were still staring at the glowing map. Each blue dot a human life. Outside, Grace waited in the lobby with Oliver. When Elias appeared, she smiled. How did it go? He exhaled. They listened, or pretended to. It's a start. Oliver tugged on his coat sleeve. Are you going to fix more storms now, Mr. Mercer? Elias crouched, smiling faintly. Something like that, partner. Grace laughed softly. He likes you, you know. Elias met her gaze. The feeling's mutual. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, harmless, almost beautiful. Grace looked out the window, then back at him. Looks like the storm's over. Elias glanced toward the horizon, his expression thoughtful. No, he said, it's just beginning, but this time we're ready. By dawn, the next day, Boston was quiet again. Streets still coated in snow, sunlight glinting off ice like shards of glass. The city had survived the worst storm in a decade. But for Elias Mercer, It wasn't survival he felt that morning. It was something harder to define, something like awakening. The headlines spread everywhere. CEO risks life to save employee and child during blizzard. News anchors called it a miracle. Analysts called it reckless. Elias didn't watch any of it. He sat by Oliver's hospital bed, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The boy's steady breathing was the only rhythm that mattered. Grace entered quietly, wearing a wool coat 2 sizes too big, her dark hair loose for once. She carried a small breakfast tray. "You didn't eat," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Neither did you. I wasn't the one who stopped a city from freezing." He looked at her for a long moment before replying, "Neither was I. You and Oliver pressed the beacon. You finished what I started." Grace laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You're terrible at taking credit." "I've had enough of that for a lifetime," he said. She sat in the chair beside him. The morning light pooled through the frosted window, painting their faces in gold and white. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Oliver stirred. His eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep. "Mr. Mercer?" "Hey, champ." Elias leaned closer. "How's the heart?" Oliver smiled weakly. "Warm." Grace brushed her son's hair back. "He's been asking for you." "Me?" Elias asked, surprised. Oliver nodded. "The nurses said you kept everyone's lights on. Mom says you saved Boston." Elias's lips curved in a wry smile. "I just fixed what broke." The boy's expression grew serious. "That's what heroes do." Something in Elias's chest tightened. He looked away, swallowing against the lump in his throat. Grace noticed, her gaze softening. "You never forgave yourself, did you?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't answer at first. His hand clenched slightly on the armrest. "Every night, I rebuilt that storm in my head. Different variables, different choices. I thought if I could just calculate it right, I'd see a way I could have saved him. But no algorithm could fix what I'd lost." Grace reached across and laid her hand gently over his. "You did save him, just not in the way you think." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Frostline," she said simply. "Every life it saves now, every family that doesn't have to lose someone in the cold. That's your son's legacy, too. You turned your grief into protection for others." Elias stared at her, words caught behind his composure. "Grace?" "You honored him by keeping others warm," she finished softly. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. Oliver, sensing the weight of the moment in his innocent way, reached out and placed the silver pen in Elias's palm. "You should keep it," the boy said. "It's yours." Elias looked down at the small, battered object. The engraving dulled, the metal scratched. "No," he said quietly. "It belongs to both of you now." He closed the boy's fingers around it. "When you're older and life feels too cold, press this. It'll remind you that someone's always watching out for you." Oliver smiled sleepily. "Even if it doesn't glow?" Elias's eyes softened. "It doesn't have to. It already did its job." That afternoon, the hospital was a blur of reporters and flashbulbs. Outside, cameras waited for a glimpse of the CEO who had defied every headline stereotype. But Elias avoided the front entrance entirely. He met Grace and Oliver by the side door, where the snow had begun to melt into slush. "Where will you go now?" Grace asked. He adjusted the scarf around his neck. "There's a hearing with the board tomorrow. I'll finalize Harper's removal and redirect Frostline's funding to emergency response networks. After that, I don't know. Maybe I'll take a break from skyscrapers for a while." Grace smiled faintly. "You'd hate retirement." "Probably," he admitted. "But I could learn to hate it somewhere warm." She laughed softly, then grew quiet. "You could come by sometime. Oliver would like that." Elias looked at her. "And you?" She met his gaze steadily. "Maybe I would too." Snowflakes began to fall again, soft and lazy. The air between them felt charged, like the world was holding its breath. Elias wanted to say something, to promise he'd return, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. Frostline Guardian. It read, embossed in silver. Beneath it, Lead Engineer, Grace Holloway. Her eyes widened. What is this? It's your new position, he said simply. You're the reason the system worked last night. You kept it alive. You earned this. She blinked back tears. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said, smiling faintly, and start on Monday. She laughed, shaking her head. You don't waste time, do you? Storms don't wait. Neither should we. Oliver tugged on his coat. Does that mean Mom's your boss now? Elias chuckled, crouching down to meet his eyes. Something like that, partner. Oliver grinned. Then we're gonna fix everything. Elias's smile faded into something gentler. Yeah, he said softly. We are. He stood, nodding to Grace. Take care of him. Her reply was quiet but certain. You too, Elias. As he walked toward the waiting car, the wind picked up again, scattering snow around his feet. Grace watched him go, the silver pen glinting faintly in her hand, its light reflected in the afternoon sun. Hours later, back in his apartment overlooking the city, Elias stood by the window. The skyline glittered with Frostline's blue beacons, safe zones pulsing gently across rooftops. He placed his hand against the cold glass. For the first time in years, the reflection staring back didn't look like a man haunted by loss. It looked like someone still becoming. And somewhere beyond the frozen streets, a small boy was laughing again. Snow drifted like quiet ash over the Charles River, softening the city into silver stillness. In Frostline's downtown headquarters, the once intimidating glass tower had come alive again, its light steady, its hum gentle, like the heartbeat of a city breathing after near death. Inside, the atmosphere was different now. The cold formality had thawed. Employees moved with a cautious optimism, talking in low, reverent tones about what the boss did during the blizzard. But Elias Mercer wasn't in his office. He was in the lower-level lab. Alone, coat off, sleeves rolled up, soldering a circuit board beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp. The faint scratch of a pen echoed beside him. Grace sat across the table, reviewing diagnostic data on the Frostline network. Her hair was tied loosely, a pencil stuck behind one ear. She looked nothing like the woman who had once scrubbed the marble floors of this building. She belonged here now, focused, capable, radiant in her quiet determination. Temperature readings are stabilizing across all grids, she said, glancing up. No further outages reported. Elias nodded. Good. The system learned faster than I expected. She smiled. Maybe it learned from you. He chuckled softly. Then it'll develop insomnia and trust issues. Grace tilted her head. And a conscience. Don't forget that. Their eyes met across the desk. For a brief second, the room felt warmer, not from the machinery, but from the connection between them, subtle yet undeniable. Oliver's laughter carried in from the hallway. The boy had become a fixture around the lab, weaving between engineers, proudly wearing his Frostline Guardian badge. When he burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold, he was holding something small and silver. Look, he said, breathless. It works again. Grace smiled. What does, honey? He held up the silver pen, its engraving catching the light. Mr. Mercer fixed it. Elias looked sheepish. It wasn't broken. I just updated it. Grace took it gently from her son's hands, examining it. The words, "For those who freeze alone," gleamed anew, but there was an added line beneath them now, subtle, almost hidden, and those who help them find warmth again. Her eyes softened. You changed it. Elias met her gaze. You changed what it meant. Oliver tugged on Elias's sleeve. Does that mean it's magic now? Elias smiled. It always was. Grace laughed quietly, shaking her head. You're going to spoil him. Elias looked at the boy with a mixture of affection and something deeper, an ache, but no longer a wound. "He's already spoiled me," he said softly. A quiet fell between them. Grace turned the pen over in her hand. "You never told me why you gave this to me that night. Not just because it was a beacon. Something else." Elias hesitated, his voice lowering. "When my son died, I kept one thing from him, a compass pendant. It was inscribed with our family motto, 'Keep time, find home.' I carried it everywhere, but I couldn't bear to look at it. It reminded me of how I'd failed him." Grace's eyes glistened. "You gave the pen that inscription instead." He nodded. "A promise that someone, somewhere, would find warmth when I couldn't." She blinked back tears. "You did keep your promise." "Not alone," he said gently. Oliver climbed onto the chair beside Elias, resting his small head against the man's arm. "Mom says you fixed the world," he murmured sleepily. Elias smiled faintly. "Just a very small part of it." Grace watched them quietly. The powerful man who'd once built a company to bury his grief, now letting a child lean against him as if he were family. A knock came at the door. A young engineer peeked in. "Mr. Mercer, the press conference starts in 10 minutes. The city's mayor is already there." Elias sighed softly. "Thank you, Ben. We'll be right up." As the engineer left, Grace looked at him. "You don't want to go, do you?" "I don't like cameras," he admitted. "They'll want to see the man who saved Boston." He shook his head. "Then they should see you instead." She laughed quietly. "I mop floors a little less these days, but I still don't do microphones." Elias smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Grace, people need to see who you are, what courage looks like when it's not born from power." She blushed faintly. "And what about you?" He paused. "I'll stand next to you, but this time not in front." Her throat tightened at the quiet sincerity in his tone. She nodded. "Then we'll both go." The Frostline auditorium was packed. Reporters, engineers, even city officials filling the seats. Cameras flashed as Elias and Grace stepped onto the stage. Oliver sat proudly in the front row, swinging his legs, the silver pen clasped in his hands. Elias approached the podium, his bandaged arm in a dark sling. For a long moment, he said nothing, just looked at the faces before him. "When I built Frostline," he began, "I thought technology could save everyone. I was wrong. Technology can only follow the lead of human hands and human hearts." He glanced toward Grace. "Last week, a mother and her son reminded me of that. They reminded me that progress isn't measured in profits or patents. It's measured in the lives that go on because of kindness." Grace's eyes glistened. She hadn't expected him to say her name, but when he did, the applause that followed filled the room. Elias continued, his voice low but strong. "The blizzard showed us what we can be when we remember we're all part of the same network, of hope, of courage, of warmth. Frostline will carry that forward." He stepped back, gesturing for Grace to join him. The applause rose again. Grace leaned toward the microphone, her voice trembling just slightly. "I was just trying to keep my son safe. But that night, a stranger reminded me that no one truly freezes alone. And I hope we never forget that." Oliver's small voice carried over the hush that followed. "We won't." Laughter rippled through the audience, soft and pure. Elias smiled, looking out at the sea of faces, scientists, journalists, ordinary citizens, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing apart from them. He felt home. Spring came late to Boston that year. The snow lingered in quiet corners, shrinking into puddles that reflected sunlight like mirrors. But inside Frostline Technologies, something new was blooming, something that had nothing to do with the weather. The company had changed. Gone were the sterile hallways and the anxious hush of corporate perfection. Laughter drifted through the labs now. Engineers worked side by side with city officials, emergency medics, and teachers. Frostline wasn't just a tech giant anymore, it was a lifeline. At the center of it all stood the newly unveiled Frostline Guardian Program, a network of AI-assisted heat shelters, family tracking systems, and real-time medical dispatchers designed to prevent tragedies like the one Boston had almost faced. And the project's lead engineer, Grace Holloway, stood at the front of the launch stage, her voice steady as she spoke to the crowd gathered in the grand atrium. "Technology doesn't save people," she said, looking out across the sea of faces. "People save people. Technology just gives them the chance." The applause that followed rolled like thunder through the glass halls. From the balcony above, Elias Mercer watched silently, one hand resting on the railing. He wasn't the kind of man who sought recognition anymore. He had given the stage to Grace, and she had taken it with quiet grace that rivaled any headline he'd ever earned. When she stepped down from the podium, reporters rushed her, firing questions about the AI, the ethics, the future of Frostline. She answered calmly, never mentioning her own hardship, never painting herself as a victim. She spoke like someone who had already lived through the storm and come out stronger for it. Oliver waited at the foot of the stairs, holding a small cardboard sign he'd drawn himself. Frostline Heroes. It was crooked and misspelled, but when Grace saw it, she laughed, scooping him up. "Best project poster I've seen all year," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Elias approached as the crowd began to disperse. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie, his blue eyes softer now, touched with something gentler than ambition, peace. "You handled them better than I ever did," he said. Grace smiled. "That's because you trained me well." "I didn't train you," he said. "I just got out of your way." Oliver looked up at him, squinting against the sunlight streaming through the skylight. "Mr. Mercer, are we going to make more Frostlines?" Elias crouched to meet his gaze. "We're going to make something even better. You know what's stronger than Frostline?" Oliver shook his head. "Warmth," Elias said simply. "The kind people give to each other." Grace watched the exchange, her eyes soft. "He's going to remember that." "I hope he forgets everything else," Elias said quietly, and for a moment the shadow of his old grief flickered across his face. Grace reached out, touching his arm. "You gave him a better story to carry forward." He looked at her then, the sunlight catching the faint silver at his temples. "You gave me one, Grace." Before she could reply, the lights dimmed and a screen behind them flickered to life. Live footage from one of the new Frostline Guardian shelters across the city. Children played in a brightly lit rec room while volunteers handed out blankets and soup. At the bottom corner of the broadcast, a ticker scrolled, "Frostline Guardian, protecting families in every storm." Grace turned toward the screen, her hand instinctively finding Elias's. "We actually did it," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "We did it because you wouldn't let me stop trying." Oliver pointed toward the ticker. "Look, your names are there." Elias glanced up, and sure enough, under the program's tagline were 2 lines of text. Founder and Visionary, Elias Mercer. Chief Architect, Grace Holloway. He smiled, shaking his head. "They'll think we planned it that way." "Maybe we did," she teased. Reporters began calling out again, this time asking for a joint photo. Grace hesitated, looking to him. "Go ahead," he said, stepping closer. "If it helps people see what this is really about." So they stood side by side, flashes reflecting off the glass walls as cameras captured the moment. The genius who'd built a system from grief and the woman who'd taught it compassion. When the crowd finally dispersed, Grace turned to him. "You could have stood in the spotlight yourself." Elias shook his head. "I've had my time in the light. This is yours." She smiled softly. "You sound like a man who's letting go." He looked out at the skyline, where the last of the snow was melting into spring rain. "Maybe that's the only way to move forward." She stepped closer. "And where will forward take you?" Elias smiled faintly. "Wherever people still freeze and need someone to remind them they're not alone." Her reply came like a whisper. "Then you'll never run out of work." He laughed quietly, the sound low and warm, Not as long as you're around to keep me human. From across the hall, Oliver called out, Mom! Mr. Mercer! Come see! They put up the Frostline Guardian banner. They turned. Above the atrium entrance, a new banner unfurled, white and blue, bearing Frostline's emblem, a circle enclosing a small flame. Grace read the inscription aloud, her voice trembling slightly, For those who freeze alone, and those who bring them home. Elias looked at her, then at Oliver's smiling face, and felt something settle quietly inside him, a sense of completion. The storm inside him, long and relentless, had finally broken. And as they stood together beneath that new symbol, surrounded by laughter, warmth, and light, Elias Mercer realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just saving others from the cold. He'd finally found his own way home. 1 year later, the first anniversary of the Frostline Guardian program arrived quietly. No storms, no blackouts, no crises. Just a calm winter morning that smelled of wood smoke and possibility. Boston was blanketed in soft snow again, but this time no one feared it. Warmth pulsed through every Frostline shelter, every home linked to the Guardian network. The city was alive, glowing blue on the map of Elias Mercer's office, each light a family safe, a life protected. He stood by the window of his rebuilt headquarters, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. His reflection looked different now, no longer haunted, no longer running. His glasses caught the faint glow of his monitor where the newest Frostline Guardian nodes had come online in New Hampshire and Maine. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," he said. Grace stepped inside, her coat dusted with snow. She carried a small gift box tied with a silver ribbon. Behind her, Oliver peeked in, bundled in a bright blue scarf embroidered with the Frostline emblem. "You're early," Elias said, smiling. Grace handed him the box. "We wanted to bring this before the ceremony." He untied the ribbon carefully. Inside was a new pen, sleek, silver, engraved in delicate cursive. He read the inscription aloud. "No one freezes alone." Grace smiled softly. "You inspired the motto. The whole city's using it now." Elias turned the pen over in his hand, touched. "You didn't have to." "We wanted to," she said, "because this isn't just a company anymore. It's a promise." Oliver tugged at Elias's sleeve. "Mom says you're going to make a speech today. Are you nervous?" Elias chuckled. "Terrified." The boy grinned. "Don't worry, just tell them the truth. That's what heroes do." Grace looked at her son, then back at Elias. "He's not wrong." Elias's gaze softened. "I think we're redefining that word." She tilted her head. "How so?" He gestured toward the snowy city outside. "Heroes aren't the ones who stop storms. They're the ones who show up when the storm hits, who hold the line until the light returns." Grace stepped closer. "And what happens when the light finally stays?" Elias looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Then maybe they get to rest." She smiled faintly. "You've earned it." He shook his head gently. "Not alone." Later that afternoon, the Frostline anniversary ceremony filled the public square. Families gathered under heat lamps, children clutching blue balloons with the Frostline flame emblem. Snow fell lightly, harmlessly, like confetti. Grace stood beside Elias on the outdoor stage, her gloved hand holding his notes as the crowd waited. Oliver sat in the front row, bundled in his scarf, beaming. When Elias stepped to the microphone, the audience fell silent. 1 year ago, he began, we faced the kind of cold that doesn't just freeze the skin, it freezes hope. We lost power, we lost faith. Some of us nearly lost each other, but the city didn't break. It held together. You held together. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. Families, workers, doctors, children. Frostline Guardian was built on the belief that technology can serve something bigger than profit. But what I learned that night is this: machines don't save people. People save people. The code just gives them a fighting chance. Applause rippled through the crowd, but he lifted a hand for quiet. There's one person I need to thank for reminding me of that, he said, turning slightly. Grace Halloway. The cameras flashed as Grace stepped forward, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Elias continued, his voice steady but filled with feeling. When I lost faith, she showed me what it means to keep moving. When I built walls, she reminded me that warmth doesn't come from technology, it comes from trust. Grace blinked back tears, her hand pressed over her heart. The crowd erupted in applause. Elias smiled faintly, his breath misting in the cold air. If Frostline stands for anything, it's that no one, no matter how forgotten, how lost, should ever face the cold alone. He stepped back, and for a long, beautiful moment the crowd rose to its feet. Oliver jumped up too, cheering louder than anyone. "That's my mom and my friend," he shouted. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Grace covered her face, laughing through tears. Elias glanced down at her, his eyes shining. "You raised quite the advocate," he whispered. "He learned from the best," she replied softly. That evening, after the ceremony, the three of them walked together through the quiet streets of Beacon Hill. The snow underfoot glowed faintly blue from the reflection of Frostline's street lamps. Oliver ran ahead, leaving small footprints in the snow. Grace and Elias followed at a slower pace, the winter light wrapping around them like silk. "Feels different this year," Grace said. Elias nodded. "It does, like the world finally exhaled." She looked at him. "What about you?" He smiled. "I think I finally learned to breathe again." They stopped near the edge of the park, where a Frostline shelter glowed softly in the distance, a beacon of warmth against the cold. Families gathered around the entrance, laughter spilling into the night. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver pen. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight. "He's been asking if we could engrave another one," she said, nodding toward Oliver. Elias raised a brow. "Another?" "For him," she said, smiling. "A reminder that even small hands can hold the light." Elias took the pen gently, his thumb brushing the inscription. Then he looked at her, really looked, and said, "You've turned loss into legacy, Grace." She shook her head softly. "We did." He smiled. "Together, then." Oliver called out from the end of the path, his laughter echoing through the still night. "Come on! It's snowing again!" They started walking toward him. Elias looked up. The flakes drifted slow and bright, catching in his dark hair and on Grace's coat. "Maybe it's his way of saying hello," Grace murmured. Elias glanced skyward, his voice quiet but sure. "Then it's the warmest snow I've ever felt." Oliver ran back toward them, his small footprints overlapping theirs. Grace took his hand. Elias fell into step beside them. Together, they walked down the snowy street, three figures framed against the glowing city, their footprints merging into a single path leading home. And above them, as snow fell gently through the lamplight, the Frostline emblem flickered across the skyline, its soft flame burning steady against the endless winter.